The battle over North Carolina's extremely controversial so-called bathroom law, which requires transgender people to use the public restrooms that corresponds to the sex on their birth certificate rather than their own gender identity, has now led to the state and the federal government suing one another in one of the biggest, probably the biggest, most high-profile civil rights fight on this issue ever. North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory announced his suit earlier today in response to a letter from the Justice Department's top civil rights official last week that gave the state until the close of business today to stop implementation or compliance with the law because it violates the Federal Civil Rights Act.
I do not agree with their interpretation of federal law. That is why this morning I have asked a federal court to clarify what the law actually is.
Just a few hours later, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, a North Carolina native, responded by announcing the Justice Department's own lawsuit.
We are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the state of North Carolina, Governor Pat McCrory, the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, and the University of North Carolina. We are seeking a court order declaring HB 2's restroom restriction impermissibly discriminatory, as well as a statewide bar on its enforcement.
Then the Attorney General did something I have never seen any other high-level federal official do in my lifetime. She made a full-throated defense of the rights and equality of transgender citizens.
What we must not do, what we must never do, is turn on our neighbors, our family members, our fellow Americans for something that they cannot control and deny what makes them human. And this is why none of us can stand by when a state enters the business of legislating identity and insists that a person pretend to be something or someone that they are not. But no matter how isolated, no matter how afraid, and no matter how alone you may feel today, know this, that the Department of Justice, and indeed the entire Obama administration, want you to know that we see you, we stand with you, and we will do everything we can to protect you going forward.
Joining me now, Julie Fernandes, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the DOJ, and Chase Trangio, staff attorney with the ACLU's LGBT and AIDS project. And Chase, let me start with you. This felt historic to me. Am I wrong? Has anyone ever made that kind of full-throated argument at that level of federal government?
I totally agree, Chris. This was a really big deal. And just last year, we thought it was a big deal that President Obama said the word transgender. And here we are today with this very powerful, very affirming defense of transgender people in a moment when transgender people are literally under attack. And it was moving, and it was critically important. It came at the exact right time.
Julie, you worked at the Department of Justice, helping to enforce civil rights law. The argument here is whether the Civil Rights Act, and specifically Title VII and some Title IX, which has to do with education, permits the kind of law that North Carolina's passed. What do we know about what courts have said about this kind of thing?
Well, I do think at this point, Chris, it's pretty clear, certainly in the Fourth Circuit, the EEOC, the Justice Department, all agree that transgendered people are protected against discrimination in employment under Title VII and against educational discrimination in the schools, Title IX. For a long time, our laws have protected people in their gender identity and expression, going back to the late 80s in early-ish Title VII cases. So I think the law is pretty clear, and Justice Department is putting their muscle behind something, a really important principle.
This now then becomes a huge, not just a legal fight, but a huge political fight. I mean, we now have federal government suing a state to essentially overturn a state law is the stuff of all of some of the most iconic civil rights battles in American history, and this comes now into this election year.
Yeah,
well,
obviously.
Right.
Oh, sorry, Chase, go ahead.
Obviously, this is an incredibly political moment when this is happening. But you know, as Julie mentioned, this is a longstanding legal principle. Sex discrimination covers transgender people. We know that. The courts have ruled that over and over again. And I think what's happening now is we're seeing state-level politicians digging in to a discriminatory view about transgender people and really calling the question. And Governor McCrory continually says he's the one being bullied. But the reality is that transgender people are being bullied, as Attorney General Lynch said today, by state legislatures in a sort of widespread way that we haven't seen before.
Does this end up before the Supreme Court? And if so, is there Supreme Court jurisprudence on this specific issue of sort of transgender rights specifically?
I don't think this ends up before the court. I don't know, Chase, if you have more information about this. I think that this is going to end up getting resolved in the lower courts, is my guess. It may even be resolved out of court, as the Attorney General suggested a little bit in her press conference. But I think that it is classic civil rights work, and classically great civil rights work, for the department to stand up against state laws that are discriminatory. They're doing it actually twice in North Carolina, as you know, Chris.
Yep.
This is not the only lawsuit that they have suing the state of North Carolina for having a reactionary law. So this is, it could go to the court, of course, but I do think that the hope is that this can be resolved so that we can protect the rights and the dignity of transgendered people all over the country.
Briefly, there's a law in Mississippi that my sense is just as bad on the merits. Is our sense that the Department of Justice hasn't worked through the process enough to kind of weigh in on that?
Well, we did.
Well, I don't know where they are on this. I do know that the Attorney General said that they were looking at other similar laws to the extent that they exist. What was interesting here, too, Chris, is that this was actually a preemption issue as well. You know, North Carolina reached out for this issue because Charlotte had
to preempt Charlotte,
Right, because Charlotte had an ordinance that was going to clarify to make sure they were protecting appropriately the transgendered population. So North Carolina kind of reached out for this fight in kind of a very audacious way. But I do think the department is looking at other laws around the country, and this moment is a time for, I think I saw that there was some place that actually repealed part of a law that was going to discriminate against transgendered people in response to this. So this is all good.
Briefly, you have a lawsuit against Mississippi.
Yeah, we sued Mississippi today for HB 1523, which was the lawsuit that allows for discrimination based on sincerely held religious beliefs, a belief that you don't believe that transgender people exist, that you don't believe in sex outside of marriage, or that you don't believe that marriage is anything other than between a man and a woman. And we challenged that law in federal court today.
And that's a federal lawsuit.
That's a
so
federal
we will see
lawsuit.
that play out, even if, again, this is sort of private right of action, right? You guys are suing here. This is not the Department of Justice, but they may weigh in as well.
Yeah.
All right, Julie Fernandes, Chase Strangio, thank you so much for joining us tonight.